If failure is actually part of the process, why then do we fear it so much? Come to think of it, we listen and we see motivation, we hear motivations everywhere like failure is part of process, is a way to success. But then why do we fear the word failure, and why do we fear to fail so much? We shrink anytime we fail, we dread it so much like some kind of nightmare. Which brings me to the question, what is failure and what exactly are we afraid of? In Falling Forward, John Maxwell actually explains that the problem is not actually failure, but our perception and reactions towards it. The fear of failure actually begins when we start seeing it as a reflection of who we are. It stops being I fail and it begins to develop into I am a failure, and that perceptions actually shifts and changes everything. I remember as a little boy when I failed in school, the fear to even bring my reports to my parents is actually a big deal for me, because this is not to shame them or anything, it is as much as they understand themselves. The fear of being labeled a failure actually supersedes the fact that I fail and I can do better with better improvements, with better coach, better teachers, and better study. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So the problem at times is not necessarily the fact that we fail, but our perception of the process of failing. This is also similar to what Stephen Covey expressed in his paradigm, the 7 habits of highly effective individual, where he explains that the way we see things actually shapes our response to them, and this actually goes on to shape the mindset, whereby some people, when they fail, they see it as final, as if that's the end. They take it very personal in such a way that there's nothing that can be done. Once they fail, it is the end. While others, they see it as a stage for another set of information to be benefited from. They see failure as something to be learned from, like something to get some information from and grow. This is the same failure. You understand what I'm trying to say now? This is the same failure, but just different people handling it from different perspective. That's exactly what I've been trying to explain to us. So why exactly is failure feared? If we can look at this other perspective and see it as an avenue to grow, even if we fail repeatedly, it does not mean it's the end. People fail. If it happens to you, does not mean is the final. That perspective of seeing failure as a blockage, as a total deadline, as a total way of no return is actually very wrong. So which take us back to that question, is this why we fear failure? Maybe the fear is not actually failure itself, but the fact that we fear to be seen failing, we fear to be judged, we tend to realize after we fail that probably we are not as ready as we thought of ourselves. And furthermore, failure actually bruises our ego. Failure confronts our ego and actually interrupts the image that we've built of ourselves, and that can be very uncomfortable. All that being said, what if failure is actually just doing its job? What if it's not there to define us but to refine us? What if failure is actually a pathway to something bigger? What if it's a way to something better, an outcome of a better version of yourself? Won't you be willing to actually take that risk and see what it has to offer? Actually, in the end, when you fail and you refuse to get up from it, then it happens, which means it's actually occur. You fail, but when you fail and you get up, fail again and you get up, that's actually you being refined on on the basis of the failure that you keep on making. And I believe you can't be failing and be going back to the same failure at every time. So far as you have the ability to think, the ability to realize that this happened previously, and you recall the process of how it actually happened, you can look for a way to avoid it from happening, which actually makes it make sense that you've learned from your failure. Finally, on this particular episode, I will leave you with this. Probably the real shift is not in avoiding failure, but learning to see it differently. Alright, this is the Unanswered, and this is where we explore questions that stays with us. My name is Isaac, and until the next series, I say stay strong and make sure you learn from your failure. I wish you good success. Thank you very much for listening to me. Have a wonderful time ahead.